Folks. Well, this is Joe Jarrett with the Missouri Department of Conservation, and I'd like to welcome you to our birding webinar on 7 simple actions to help birds. With us to present today is Dana Ripper, who is co-director of the Missouri River Bird Observatory, located out of Marshall, Missouri. So thanks for joining us, Dana. How are you?
I'm great, Joe. I hope everyone's doing all right tonight.
Exactly. Why don't you briefly tell us a little bit more about the MRBO?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see our mission tagline there. We are into conservation via science, education, and advocacy. We're located in Arrow Rock, Missouri. People are welcome to visit us there at 406 Main Street on weekends. And this is our website, mrbo.org.
Well, wonderful. Thank you. And today we're talking about ways to help birds. So why don't you tell us a little bit more as we go to the next slide?
Absolutely. So, Joe, birds really need our help. There was a big study done a few years ago that showed us all that in North America, we've lost about a third of our birds. So this is almost 3 billion birds
A
in not
third.
even
Wow.
one lifetime.
Wow.
So 50 years.
What's causing all of this?
Well, we'll talk about
We're
a
going to
few
go
of
into
those
that.
things,
Yeah. And
but
what kind of birds, I guess we should start with, what kind of birds are we talking about? These look like some pretty popular ones.
yeah, so it's everything from some of our most familiar backyard birds that we can see here, right? Some of these are migrants that are incoming right now, like grosbeaks and orioles. Some of them winter with us, such as juncos and white-throated sparrows, and then, of course, birds like blue jays that are just familiar year-round birds. Um, we've lost aerial insectivores, which are the little guys that basically just fly around catching bugs in the air. So barn swallow is one of those species. I think that's very familiar to a lot of people, and we've lost 2 out of 5 of those. And then migratory birds as a group, again, you can see the Baltimore oriole here. We've lost almost 30% of our migratory
Oh,
species since 1970. So lots of different species. Here it is kind of broken down more by habitat, and we can see here that our grassland birds, which we'll see tonight, is very important for Missouri. Our grassland birds have taken the biggest hit of any guild of birds.
over half. Oh, that is tragic.
Yeah. So of these, eastern meadowlark is a very familiar species. We've lost more than 50% of them, 75% of meadowlarks specifically.
Right.
So just a wonderful bird with a beautiful song that I think a lot of folks are probably familiar with.
The world would be a much quieter and sadder place without them.
Indeed.
Right.
Indeed. So we're going to
Again,
talk a little bit about like how this is happening. And then
yeah.
of course the sort of crux of our matter this evening is what can we do to help?
All right. So let's talk about what's causing some of the declines, and then we'll get into the 7 ways. So what do we
Yes.
see in here?
We are looking at a few good examples of some of Missouri's wonderful natural communities. So we can see going clockwise here, wetlands, forest ecosystems, and then prairie. Tall grass prairie. And, I'd just like folks to see here that we've taken these natural communities across our state and in the millions of acres, and we've turned them into things like monoculture row cropping that has a lot of like pesticide inputs. And we've turned them into, of course, a lot of like suburban areas, lots of lawns, lots of development, just places where not a whole heck of a lot of species of birds are able to live.
Right. And I heard a statistic that of the original prairie lands in Missouri, we're down to like less than 3%. That's pretty
Actually,
alarming.
Joe, it's I'm sorry to tell you, it's even worse than that.
Even more
It's
alarming.
actually less than 1%. What you all are seeing right now is a map, thanks to the Missouri Natural Heritage Database and Missouri Prairie Foundation. This is a map here of pre-settlement prairie, that was determined by old land surveys around the
Okay.
time of settlement. So what we're looking at here in the
Is
peach color is the
okay, the
tall grass
darker
prairie that is,
color.
yeah, darker colors, the tallgrass prairie that existed in Missouri at the time, right, or before European settlement. And here is the extent of our
Oh,
native unplowed tall
Oh,
grass prairie now. So we have very little left. It's less than 100,000 acres of the original 14 million. So, when we look at the declines in grassland birds, this is, a pretty obvious reason why that's happened. And unfortunately, we're still destroying a lot of prairie
right.
now.
Right, we're doing what we can, but I think we all need to do more. And while we have a moment here, I just
Mhm.
want to again thank everybody for joining us. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please enter them, type them into the chat box on the right hand of your screen, and we will address those with Dana as we can throughout the next time we have. So, for example, Kat wants to know what we could do to help restore prairie land. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that.
We will.
Dana?
That's a great question, and everyone can contribute. We will definitely get there a little bit later, but everyone, no matter how much room you have or don't have, can totally contribute to proliferating our native plant species.
Okay, let's learn more.
All right. So Joe, those were, the habitat loss and things like widespread pesticides and things like that are causes of indirect mortality.
Okay.
I do want to show you next the causes of direct mortality for North
Wow.
American birds, and this is per year. I know it's pretty shocking.
Wow.
Um, but this is,
Wow.
thing happens and bird dies. So
Right.
cats kill a lot of birds, and these are both feral and outdoor cats, indoor outdoor cats that folks let out. Collisions with windows, about 1 billion. And then
Hmm.
folks can see also collisions with vehicles, of course, and then industrial collisions, including things like power lines, cell towers, things of that nature.
Okay. Okay, so these
So,
are the top direct causes.
correct.
All
Direct
right.
causes, exactly.
Looks like there's
Yep.
ways we could help with those.
Yes, there are. And that is exactly what we're going to talk about. So that's kind of like the crux of the seven simple actions to help birds, how we can, all of us in our kind of everyday lives and as individuals and families and communities, we can address a lot of those causes and really make a difference in helping birds, like even at a population level. So we can get into these.
Yes.
We're going to go through each of these. Some of them are a little more complex than others. So some of them are quite simple. I'm going to start with the simplest ones first. And the first one is just keeping cats indoors. Super simple thing to do. Um, so unfortunately, we do have situations like this. Cats are naturally predators, of course. But I think something that a lot of people don't know is that they're not native to North America. They're originally native to the Middle East. And so that's why they're such a high cause of mortality, is because they do their natural thing as predators, but our wildlife, not just birds, but um, small mammals and amphibians and reptiles are just, they didn't evolve with these. They
Yeah,
didn't evolve with
they're
cats.
not used to small. I mean, we have bobcats and mountain lions and even lynx in the continental United States, but yeah, not really small cats like that. Hey, a
Right. And
question.
not in the numbers that we have.
Right, right. And just wondering, so if you have kind of an indoor outdoor cat, do things like a collar with a bell help?
Um, they can help a little bit with adult birds, but when it comes to fledglings, for instance, that aren't fully flighted,
They can't get away no matter how much
they
they
can't,
hear.
right. Exactly. Exactly. So if folks want to have sort of a outdoor life for their cat, there are things called catios,
Yeah,
kind of a fun name. But yeah, there are ways that, cats can be outside without, causing damage to wildlife. And the American Veterinary Association and many, many veterinarians that I've spoken to personally are very supportive of keeping cats indoors because their lifespan is about double. So it's actually better for them as well.
yes, good point. Good point. So yeah, folks, if you have cats, please, we encourage you to keep them
Please.
indoors because they're one of the leading causes of bird deaths now.
Please. So on to the next one that is also quite simple, and this one is really just like kind of fun. Um, Pretty easy to implement in your everyday life, and it also is something that tastes better in the form of shade grown, and that is coffee.
Right. So all the coffee lovers out there, pardon the pun, but let's perk up.
Yes. Perk up, help birds, especially our migrants. So you can see the numbers here. We have, 350 or so species in Missouri. That are regularly here. About 170 species breed here, and then a lot of those, about half of those, leave Missouri, and over a third of them leave the United States entirely. And mostly where they go are tropical and subtropical regions where there's coffee grown. And if you think about it, they need habitat down there as well, right? And their habitat was not throughout the course of their evolution was not monoculture coffee plantations.
Right.
So,
Just kind of
um,
up here, I mean, birds didn't grow up with most of Missouri being like corn and soybean.
they did not,
So
they did not exactly like
yeah,
that's a very good analogy.
yeah.
Exactly. So a little graphic here that just really shows how good it is for birds, how much just more diversity in general is supported, birds being part of that diversity. A monoculture sun-grown coffee situation. Still, I mean, we are talking the tropics here, so there's still like a fair amount of bird species there. But if coffee is grown in partial shade, you get more species, and then in a true bird-friendly shade-grown coffee system, you have a couple hundred plus bird species that are able to call that habitat. So, and this is also resident birds in those ecosystems, as well as our quote-unquote migrants that come from Missouri and winter down there.
Okay, so Dana, help me understand. So coffee grows in the shade. I would think that it would do so much better in the sun, but does coffee naturally grow kind of in the shade, and is that working well?
So that's a really interesting situation, Joe. So coffee as we know it originated in tropical Africa as an understory tree.
Okay, so
So that's
it
where it started.
originally grew in the
It
shade, dappled
Yeah,
sunlight.
so it can be grown more quickly in the sun, especially with additional inputs that we probably don't want to be drinking,
Right.
herbicides and things like that. But it also ripens more quickly and it doesn't produce as high a quality of coffee. It produces more.
Hmm.
So that's what we see, can after can after can on our grocery store shelves. But the coffee that is grown in a more natural ecosystem that is shade grown is not just better for birds, it makes a better cup of coffee.
So that's really kind of that win-win.
Yeah,
Are we?
definitely.
So Sally was wondering if there's any particular brands to recommend, and I don't know if we necessarily want to do that, but what should people look for maybe when buying their
So
coffee?
I have a couple recommendations there. So Smithsonian does have a bird-friendly certification. It is very robust and very trustworthy certification. But it's also a good idea to look around on various coffee growers' websites and also definitely talk to your more local purveyors of coffee. So there are cafes, coffee shops here in Missouri that I know, and MDC and MRBO like aren't here to like endorse particular brands or
Right,
whatever, right?
right.
But there's a lot of attention given by some of our small local cafes throughout Missouri to really source the best possible product, even if it doesn't carry like a specific certification. In
Right.
some cases, these folks are actually traveling to Central and Northern
Hmm.
South America to meet with the growers and like look at the habitat and make sure that it's
Hmm.
all what they say it is. So I'm
Okay.
going to show something here really quick, Joe, and hopefully folks are seeing this, but this is the Smithsonian websites, and it's showing us some of the birds that are familiar to us that are here in Missouri or on their way now, that are supported by shade-grown, bird-friendly coffee plantations.
There's a lot of very familiar birds in there.
Hmm.
So one recommend we could have folks is do a little research and
Hmm.
maybe go online and search shade grown coffee. And then even if you localize it, maybe with Missouri or something, that could help give you more information on this.
Absolutely. It's a really fascinating study in and of itself,
Would
actually,
you
to learn
scroll
about.
back up, would you? Let's take
I
another look
don't
at
know if I
it.
can. That was
Okay,
a
then.
that was a screen recording, actually.
There we go, folks. Well, okay. So what else do we have? Oh,
We are now going to make Windows safer. for birds. And I think that this is something that folks on here may be aware of. There's been a lot of growing awareness and information being passed around about this topic. So this is second biggest cause of direct mortality after cats. About 1 billion birds a year. And it's because birds, again, a situation where they didn't evolve with this thing, they don't perceive it as a barrier. It's either reflecting vegetation that they think they can fly to, or our windows may in some cases be sort of transparent and birds can actually see the tree or bush or whatever on the other side and think they can fly to that. They can also be really disoriented by artificial light, bringing them into this like built environment that we have where then they encounter windows all the time.
So artificial light, so that's nighttime, and
Correct.
birds fly at night?
They do. Most of our migrating birds actually migrate at night. Thank you for
Wow.
bringing that up.
Again,
Yeah.
did not realize that.
Yep. Actually, if you live in a not so noisy area and you go outside, especially at this time of year, if you go out
Uh-huh.
at night, you can actually hear some of this.
Yes. Yeah, this is
You can hear chip notes and little calls of birds flying over as they're migrating.
That's fascinating. I know this is that we've had a great spring here in Missouri as far as some weather. So windows are open and I know at night, yeah, I've heard some birds at
Hmm.
night.
Yep.
And
Yep.
also, I mean, we've run into this where I've put like just stickers on windows where we've had problems with birds colliding with them. So our solution was to put a bunch of stickers up so
Yes.
they could see that they can't fly through that.
Yes. Let's talk about that. I have a
Let's talk about
few
that.
pictures for folks, kind of illustrating those things. So, just of that billion or so birds that hit windows and die each year, about a third of those are at residences. Okay,
Okay.
I think a lot of times people think about just like the skyscrapers, and that is not at all the highest proportion of bird deaths. It's at residences and at low-rise buildings. So we can all make a really big difference in this particular situation by watching out for strikes at our house and treating those windows where birds are prone to strike. And I'm going to go through a few scenarios here for folks to see what that can look like on their homes. So folks can see here, there's films that you can get, and this is the same window from the inside and outside. So you can see out. This is the complete treatment. Obviously, birds are
Right.
not going to fly in that window, right?
Right. And
But you can still see out.
that is
Yep.
brilliant. Thank you. Because Sally was just asking, does a screen in front of a window help? And if you pull down a shade, evidently that will help. And Christy wants to know if they sell stickers for home use. Christy, I literally went to the local like store and just found some kid stickers. We didn't get fancy, but I know, Dana, they do have stickers of some predatory birds, such as hawks and
Yes.
things. And
Yes,
we'll
and
see
we'll
that.
get there. I want
Okay.
to I want to address the first couple comments and questions first. Yes, screens can help. Um Partially because they break up that reflectivity or that transparency, and partially because if a bird does hit it, oftentimes it will bounce.
Okay,
It
good.
may not be uninjured,
Right.
but it's certainly better than hitting a glass barrier straight on. As far as pulling down shades, in some situations that can help. Do consider though that we are talking about the reflectivity that's on the outside.
Mm,
So if it's a reflectivity issue, shades may or may not help, especially depending on the time of day and like the
mhm.
angle of light. But if it's a transparency issue, right, birds are seeing through the window and seeing something attractive on the other side, then shades will definitely help. As
Good
far
to
as
know.
things like decals and things, there's lots of different options. So this is one of the most popular and the most effective options right here. And this is um, very different from what you just described, Joe, about
Yeah.
like the hawk decals. Um, the American Bird Conservancy has tested hundreds of products over hundreds of different trials and
Okay.
have found that the best thing is to have like a 2 by 2 spacing of
Okay.
dots or
Right.
or whatever shape you're using. Because, and some folks on here may have noticed this, if you just put a couple of stickers up, frustratingly, a bird will like find the hole between the
Okay,
stickers and
good
think
to
it's gonna
know.
fly, through that. So this is a great example. There's also something people call them various things: wind curtains, Zen curtains, acopian, bird savers is another name, and these are just really expensive parachute cord
Mm,
apparatus that they can be
hmm.
totally DIY. People call them Zen curtains. And you can see why. Like it's not an unattractive
Yeah.
situation. So
Did,
those kind of sway in the breeze, and birds obviously take notice of them and don't fly
yeah.
into the window.
Does that film you just showed, does that have a specific name if people want to look for that?
So this specifically right
Yeah.
here is called feather friendly. And it's a
User-friendly
really
film.
good and feather friendly. It's very good. They just did the huge treatment on McCormick Place in Chicago where there was a very tragic high number of bird deaths a couple falls ago. So they're a really good company, but they're also like actually local like
Okay.
sign
Yeah.
and vinyl vendors that can make such things. So there's quite a few different options, but
Hmm.
um going here, some people get real artistic um
Oh,
with
wow.
various art projects. Yeah, I mean and birds are going to see that for sure. But coverage matters, and this is kind of what we were getting to before, and what you were asking about, like having a couple hawk decals. On the left-hand side, that window is probably not going to be totally avoided by putting up
Okay.
a couple bird-shaped decals. And birds that you're trying to keep away from your windows don't necessarily respond to it being the shape of a hawk, if that is what you have. So coverage is really important. The picture on the right is certainly a lot better.
There's
And
still holes in
then
there, though.
there are still holes in there, and you can see that reflectivity, especially on the right hand side where there's no screen door, right?
Right.
Um, but a scenario like that one though is certainly going to cut way down
Hmm. It's
on
better.
collisions. They might not go to zero
Right.
though.
But it's better.
Um, yes, something like this,
Hmm.
ideal, maybe a little tiny bit of overkill. The dots don't need to be quite that big, but that 2 by 2 spacing again has been found to be really important.
Good to know. That's the thing to remember. 2 by 2.
So getting just briefly into how light plays into this whole situation here. This is a fairly extreme example. This is the 9/11 Memorial in Light in New York City, and those are birds that are trapped in it because
Wow.
they're migrating through and they just get really disoriented. You can imagine a night migrating bird that is oftentimes navigating by the stars, and they're they fly to or near or can see beams of light, and they're attracted to them and disoriented by them. So in New York City, they actually turn off the
Okay.
9/11
Hmm.
memorial in light when too many birds get trapped in it. And so, obviously none of us have something like that shining off the top of our houses, but I'm sure folks have noticed whether it's in their neighbors or whether it's a nearby stadium or a car dealership or whatever,
Hmm.
we throw out ridiculous amounts of unneeded light at night. And taken in aggregate, a town or a city for sure produces enough light that it's disorienting, like
Right.
potentially millions of migratory birds at any given time. Um, so there are solutions to this. I'm not gonna there's a lot of them. I highly recommend that folks go to darksky.org, which is the International Dark Sky Association's website, and they have all kinds of like really well researched advice about shielding your lights, having warmer colors instead
Mhm.
of the bright, blue white lights, turning down the intensity a little bit and only using them when it's needed. And this is not just good for birds. If we reduce our artificial light at night, it's good for insects, it's good for amphibians, it's good for us. It's good
Bats.
for human health as well.
Mhm.
So that's an important part of birds being attracted to our built environment and then running into these obstacles
Right.
part of
So
the
a key
situation.
thing, a key thing is, lights having them really focus only downward and not like
Yes.
360 and upwards. Does this apply to like, hey, my porch light or, I have a light by my
Oh,
back door?
absolutely. Absolutely. Just think about even, your porch light, your light by your back door. Think about moths getting
Hmm.
attracted to that,
Okay.
right? I mean, it might be fun for us to see moths, but what they'll do is just like circle and circle and circle that
Right.
light and eventually probably die of exhaustion, right?
So, right.
So,
So I think, folks, we do the best we can. And if you can turn off your outside lights, we encourage you to do that if you can.
yep. And if you can't, take some of this advice here and point it downwards and
Yeah.
make it a warmer color and, back off the intensity a little bit. So we're not saying, have no lights, and we're not saying make where you're walking totally dark. We're saying
Right.
have a dark sky, right?
Okay.
Not
Good.
not a
Dark
dark
sky.
ground, but a dark sky.
Okay.
So,
A safely lit
yeah,
ground, but a dark sky.
exactly.
Good to know.
Exactly. So we're gonna move on here, Joe, to also sort of circling back to the question sort of at the beginning about helping to restore prairie as well as other of our native Missouri ecosystems and natural communities. And this is so important. I would think that everyone on here has probably heard about how important it is to use native plants. It really can't be overstated. The Think of all the, acreage we were talking about before that has been converted to something else. The more square feet of native plants that we can all plant in aggregate can make a really huge difference.
A huge
Um,
difference. Yes. And we
yeah,
can see that here.
yes. Yep,
So
yep.
like
So
almost all
here's
the
part of
time.
it. Part of it is that native plants support a lot more native insects, right? Which are cool in and of themselves. They're
Right.
also, speaking as an ornithologist, bird food, right?
Right. Birds
So
need
here's
bugs.
just yeah, so here's just a couple of graphs showing, the magnitude by which native plants support native insects more in terms of both just like biomass, like weight and
Hmm.
mass, and then diversity as well.
So there's not just a
So
lot more of them, there's a lot more kinds of them.
yes, exactly right.
And again, these
Exactly
are
right.
native insects supported by native plants, which our native birds have evolved to eat.
Exactly, exactly. So almost all of our nesting birds feed insects to their young. I think this is an important point because I think sometimes we think of something like a cardinal, right? Familiar
Hmm.
backyard bird, comes to feeders, has that big seed crunching beak,
Right.
right? Big old beak. And we think of them as seed eaters, and they really are, and they are that for much of the year, but they still feed their young insect protein.
Oh,
So
right.
even
Right.
our birds that are, typically seed eaters or
Well, the
fruit
hummingbird, the
eaters.
main slide. I think we
Yes.
we always think of hummingbirds as just being nectar eaters, but in the spring they primarily go after insects to feed their young.
That is a great point. Absolutely. That's a perfect example. Yep. So we need to have insects around if we want to have birds around.
And we need to have native plants around if we want to have the
To
native
have
insects
insects
to
around.
feed the native birds. So the circle
It-
is, yeah.
the circle continues. Exactly. Hopefully folks on here have read some Doug Tallamy or heard Dr. Tallamy speak or know of some of his work,
Hmm.
but he's done just a lot of work and him and his grad students investigating how many butterfly and moth species as well are supported by native plants. And you can see some of
Right.
those numbers there and like how they're so incredibly different with our native trees and native plants than with our ornamental plants.
Right. And just to kind of clarify, it's not just the adult butterfly and moth that these native species support, but it's their larval, the caterpillars also, which the birds eat a ton of caterpillars to feed their young.
So so many caterpillars, yes. Since this is a slide largely um produced by Doug Tallamy's work, I will quote him in
Mhm.
saying that a nest of chickadees will feed about 9,000 caterpillars to their young in that nest. over the course of the breeding season. So that's a lot of caterpillar need right there.
And those young, how long are they in the nest? We're talking only what, a couple weeks?
Yeah, a couple weeks. I mean, it certainly varies by species,
Right.
but
So
yeah, that's
thousands and thousands and thousands of bugs over just a couple weeks.
yep, yep.
And I see a native oak tree here supports more than 500 species of native
Mhm.
butterfly and moths.
Our native oaks, as a guild of tree, as a
Yeah.
genera of trees, yeah. Hmm.
I mean, that's folks, if you need to plant trees, it looks like oaks are a real win for not
They
just
are.
birds, but all kinds of wildlife.
Yep,
And then,
absolutely.
yeah, we look at some of, I mean, your regular gardener's favorites like daylilies or hosta or
Mhm.
things like that. Even though they put out some flowers, they really don't really do anything for natives. Huh.
No, not as far as supporting our butterfly and moth species, no.
Right.
And it's
So,
not to say like they're bad or you're
no,
bad for having them or anything like
no.
that. Just try to keep, try to keep them at more of a minimum and our enormous diversity of beautiful and flowering native species as the maximum of what you're using in your yard.
Right, right. We got a question too. I don't have a yard. I just have a patio. What can I do?
I'm just the thing. I've, you
Huh.
planted that question. Yeah, so
Unintended.
absolutely. Container gardening in a balcony situation or a porch situation is very effective. You will get insects. I have heard something interesting from folks at like the Xerces Society that at this point there are a couple, two or three species of native bees that are actually
Hmm.
being found in cities
Hmm.
more than in rural areas because people are community gardening for both food and flowers. People are doing things like this picture right here with the
That is
balcony
great
and
news.
planting native plants. And rural areas are more intensively cultivated and have a lot more pesticides, right? So
True.
like these
True.
so these native bees are thriving much more in urban areas. So yeah,
It's
balcony
fascinating. So, yeah,
gardening, do
really,
it.
wherever you live, if you could put dirt in a pot and put a plant in there, make it a native.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
Fascinating.
Okay. And I know I'm just going to touch on this briefly because I know you all had a whole session on this, but contributing to citizen science is a way to help birds. Um, eBird, because we can't talk about birds and citizen science without talking about eBird. It is the premier app data management system for tracking your bird sightings. Here's a little bit about what it looks like. Really good interface, has improved enormously, keeps improving all the time. But I just want to really highlight that, eBird data contributed to the paper that we were talking about at the beginning, where we learned that, our birds had declined so much. And while that's bad news, the sheer amount of eBird data coming in from citizen scientists
Hmm.
is it
Hmm.
making an incredible contribution to our knowledge of bird distribution and bird populations. So it is absolutely worthwhile. There's a few others here. I mean, this is in no way a comprehensive list
Right,
of
right.
various community science programs that people can get involved in, but all of them, highly recommended. They're all things that I've done, so that's what
Hmm.
kind of made me put
Hmm.
them on this slide. But please do, if this is, something that interests you, please track your sightings. iNaturalist takes everything, all living things
Hmm.
can be submitted to iNaturalist, and folks can check out the other ones that are a little more specific to various species, and then some kind of more like litter um, documentation are the last couple there,
Okay,
and
and
then yeah,
and then
and then and
and
then
then
this
one
is
of the
another way.
yay, one of the best citizen science efforts that you could do now, folks. Hopefully, you've all signed up during April for Missouri's first birding challenge, which is happening from today. It kicks off through May 15th. And if
Yep.
you want more information on this, Dana, you mentioned eBird and these other apps.
Hmm.
We did a whole seminar on that, so
Yes.
you can
Yep.
watch that and all the other birding webinars that we have done by just visiting mdc.mo.gov and search Missouri Birding Challenge, and we are going to put that link up in our chat box here momentarily. So again, the Missouri's first birding challenge. We encourage you to participate in that and everything else.
Yep. Another good way to contribute to science and bird conservation.
Yes.
Okay. Avoiding pesticides. We've talked about this a little bit already.
Mm-hmm.
It goes hand in hand, certainly, with native plants. We're not going to treat our native plants with pesticides anyway, so this sort of becomes an easier thing to do the more you use native plants.
Well,
Um,
again, if we kind of just explore this a tiny bit more, if you use native
yeah,
plants, they attract native insects, which also the insects that eat the plants attract insects that eat those insects and attract the birds that eat all of those insects. So if you
you got
do it
it.
all, you
Yep,
don't really have to use pesticides because you let
right,
literally
exactly.
nature take care of it.
Yes,
Yes.
humans tend to go around using pesticides, and that's
And the lawn, look at
a
our lawns. See
yeah, and
picture.
pesticides is a broad category that includes insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, right?
Mm-hmm.
Side killing, so we're killing herbs, plants, we're killing insects, right? We're killing
Mm-hmm.
fungi. And if you just sort of like stop back and think about that and how many of those things we have, that's
Mm-hmm.
not a, I mean, that's a pretty not nice, pretty unethical war on nature that we have all these things, right? And
Yeah.
if we want to have our butterflies and moths and birds, and all these things that we love, we can't keep deciding things all the time, right?
Right, right. Maybe we ask, what is the actual real cost of that perfectly manicured, chemically treated yard?
Mm, mhm,
What's the
mhm.
big cost on that?
It's a lot,
Now,
it's
now you
big.
have, I'm sorry, in the bottom corner, now that is spot treatment for a
It is.
specific situation, even though I think that's a
It
dandelion,
is.
which is one of the earliest flowers to bloom and incredibly important for early pollinators. But if you have to treat, quote, weeds, use a spot treatment if you have to.
Agreed. And there are certainly habitat restoration situations, of course, where with invasive species,
Sure.
honeysuckle is the
Yeah.
one that comes first to mind, privet, things like that, things
Hmm.
that are non-native and invading our native landscapes to the point where they're degrading them,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Um, but
And even
something
treating them.
about dandelions specifically, though, will, if you kind of look at like botanical information,
Mhm.
they're said to grow in waste areas.
Mm.
And so that's a little bit of an old-fashioned term, right?
Mhm.
But like if you have this monoculture lawn, from the point of view of like nature and natural ecosystems, that's pretty much a waste area.
I
So
mean,
that's
right
where
when
you're
you
gonna
think
get your
about it,
that's where you're gonna get your dandelions and things that you don't like anyway. So
in
I
your
mean,
yard, because nothing else except that chemically treated
right,
grass will grow there.
right,
So there we
right. So
have it.
I'm gonna just say, try not to ever use them at all and think about um, you know, trying not to support their use on a large scale basis by thinking about the products you buy and the food
Sure.
that you eat, because
Sure.
there's the lawn, home and garden lawn situation with all of these pesticides, and then there's sort of like the broader application of them for the products that we buy.
Right.
So there's
Right.
like the people can make, oh, this is another area where people can just make a huge difference by their own individual actions.
Right. It's conscious choices.
Mhm.
Yeah. So let's plant natives and try not to use pesticides if at all possible.
Yes. Yep. And finally, getting to our very last one. Sorry about the
Oh,
disturbing picture,
it
folks.
is. Is that an albatross?
This is an albatross. This is an albatross on an uninhabited island in the South Pacific. Um, because our humans, plastic waste is pervading the world. This is another topic that people may be hearing more and more and more about, because
Mhm.
more researchers, conservationists, and just people that care all over the world are really ringing alarm bells on this topic.
Right. I want to let's dive a little bit deeper. This is what actually an albatross chick.
It is. That
So
is
this
true.
didn't
That is
even
true.
leave the island. The parents brought all of this plastic, which I assume they like perceived as food.
Correct. You have that
So
right.
in
Yep.
the middle of nowhere, these albatross, which fly sometimes for years without landing, fed this chick plastic they found in the ocean.
Well, a while
A
anyway.
while,
They
a
they
while, yeah,
fed them
maybe
for
not
a
years,
while.
but
Yeah.
so this plastic is everywhere. And
It is
it
everywhere.
starts when you drop litter in your neighborhood. And then that makes its way into sewers, which makes its way into watersheds, which makes its way into the ocean, which makes its sadly way into this chick here.
That is true. Be careful though, Joe, because I doubt that there are many people just simply dropping litter in their neighborhood.
Well, we would hope not.
Yeah, I don't really think anyone on this webinar is doing that.
Right.
And really most people don't. Um,
But it's your
it
choices in
basically,
using plastic.
yeah, but it's also it's choices in using plastic, of which sometimes there are not very many choices.
Right.
But basically we, even here in the US, really we just can't handle the volume. If folks on here would just sort of imagine 50 years ago or even 20 years ago, we just simply did not have as much of this substance as a society as we do now, and we
Right.
simply can't handle the volume. So it may be people are actually disposing of things properly, but they're overflowing, dumpsters, or they're, falling out of things. They're blowing around in wind and storms. We just have so much of it that it does
Right.
what you said
This
of
stuff
ending up
actually,
in our rivers, and the rivers flow to the sea, and there we
right.
go. But
Because
it's
even
it's
yeah, if it goes to a landfill, it doesn't necessarily stay in a landfill.
that is true.
You know,
That is true. So um this is
conscious
something
choices.
that we found out is not just bad for birds that are, doing things like feeding it to their young. It's also bad for us, folks.
Mm,
Um, so it has really come to light through lots and lots and lots of recent medical research that this is a substance that is not good for us physiologically. So we need to like not use as much, personally in our households, but we also need to, I feel like, do things like start saying to, folks at restaurants we go to, like, hey, I'd really rather have a cardboard takeout container. Can you guys maybe switch over?
when you're
So
at the grocery store and they ask
tackle it.
paper or
Yeah.
plastic,
They don't ask paper or plastic anymore,
right? They
right? They
just give
just
you
hand you
plastic.
plastic. Like,
So
right. Paper's
let's
not even
bring
a
our own
choice.
bags. Let's bring our
Right.
own bags.
Exactly. Right. And you can also let them know at that grocery store, like, hey, I don't really like that you give out a bunch of plastic bags,
Mm,
guys. So
right.
we got to tackle this one as a community and as a society, really, because it's a
Sure.
big problem.
Sure. And again, it comes
So,
down
but
to
we can
just,
work on it.
yeah, personal choices, what we could do. So less plastic whenever possible.
Indeed.
So that's a peregrine falcon.
It is.
So Uncle Sam is
No,
now
it's
a
Uncle
peregrine
Sam.
falcon. Yes.
It's Uncle Sam. Yep. So
So
yeah, um, there's lots of different actions that you can do, and so you mentioned, the mdc.mo.gov website with a lot of resources on it. We also have a lot of resources on my own organization's YouTube channel. In fact, you can watch each one of these topics explored in depth for hours if you want to. Um,
yay.
and there's also things like 3billionbirds.org, which will show you the data that we talked about at the
Hmm.
beginning about bird declines. It links to the 7 simple actions, and there's lots
Yep.
more to explore. Allaboutbirds.org, Birds of the World, ABC
I'm a
Birds.
fan. I use that a lot.
Yeah, all like really excellent resources to look at the window collision topic, particularly.
Hmm.
Stopbirdcollisions.org is a new alliance. So lots of different choices
Right.
for further study.
That is great. Some great resources here, Dana. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And then one more thing before we end. Do the Missouri
Yep.
Birdie Challenge, right? This is what we're all kind of gathered about this evening and for your last few webinars.
Right, and we thank everybody for joining us today. And again, we hope that you signed up in April to join the Missouri Birding Challenge, which goes on through the 15th. Such excitement. And again, thank you, Dana. Thank,
Yes, thank you for having me and everyone for being on here. I hope you can see that
yeah,
last slide. It's a pretty one.
thank you for being here. Thank you, all of our participants, for caring about birds. We were with Dana Ripper, who's the co-director of the Missouri River Bird Observatory, located out of Marshall, Missouri. Dana, thank you for sharing some amazing information and care about birds.
Yep.
That wraps it up, folks. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. And have a great evening and get outside and discover nature. That's a wrap.
Night, everyone.